I'm Ralph Hedges, director of the Chopin Piano Academy in Honolulu, Hawaii. I've been teaching for 50 years and more and counting. I don't regard my teaching as a job, but more as a career, something I'm extremely passionate about and I absolutely love. I would like to talk to you about music as such and music teaching, music theory. There are many different subjects that I would like to discuss with you because I have different ideas on each of these subjects. First of all, music is a language, and as a language, it should be treated as a language. Oddly enough, though, you look at the word language in a music dictionary or any dictionary, and you will find the various languages of the world listed there. There are hundreds of spoken languages. There's Braille, there's body language, there's computer language, etc., but nothing for the language of music. And I think it's a huge error and an omission. Music is a language and as such has some of the same shall we say, parallels as the spoken language. Many people have spoken about music as having sentences, phrases, and this sort of thing, and yes, it does. But on the other hand, so oftentimes the music theory book will start to define cadences as being an authentic cadence or a perfect authentic cadence, and so on and so forth. And yet you look at some of the preludes of Chopin, particularly the number 7, Opus 28, and you will find that he ends on an A major chord with the 5th in the bass and ends with the root. It's a cadence, and it's up to the pianist to make it sound like a cadence, but it's not one of the acceptable theoretical cadences that you will find in textbooks. There are many other areas that are either defined so narrowly that they don't make any sense or they're of no use. Another example, many people in the jazz area talk about a blues scale. There is no such thing as a blues scale. The blues were developed in the early part of the 1900s, even the latter part of the 1800s, by people who were uneducated, who used music as part of their life. And they developed what now has become the blues, but they had no idea what a blues scale was. So there is no such thing. But in any case, to define something within a box is just not the correct thing. To define music as a something rather than as a language is not the way to go. The part of the problem, and I shouldn't say part of the problem, but a good deal of the problem is in definitions of what music is and the different parts of music. For example, we talk about the dominant seventh. One of the most enigmatic, one of the most fascinating, one of the most misunderstood terms in all of music theory. So misunderstood, as a matter of fact, that it's useless as a term. To give you an example, we talk, to go back to a movie, The Wizard of Oz, with Judy Garland. What was that, about 1936, somewhere in that area. One of the most beloved movies in all time. Well, as you know, Dorothy, at the end of the movie, wants to get home. So she wants to go to the wizard. Well, she's going to the wizard with the scarecrow, the Tin Man, and so on. Well, after a lot of things going on, they finally get to see the wizard, who turns out to be not a wizard at all, but a man. And as you remember, he says, "Oh no, I'm not a bad man. I'm a good man. I'm just a poor wizard." I'm sure you remember that saying that. But anyway. Dorothy wants to get home, and the wizard promises her he'll take her home in his balloon. You remember the story after that. So anyway, what does the Tin Man want? He wants a heart so he can feel love and be loved. Oh, the wizard said, you already have love and you already are loved. One thing you don't have, and he pulled out this heart with a chain on it and put it on the Tin Man. And the Tin Man said, oh, you know, I have a heart now. So then we get to the Scarecrow. What does the Scarecrow want? The Scarecrow wants a brain. Oh, the wizard says, now I'm just paraphrasing this, of course, but the wizard says, you can think, but one thing you don't have is a degree. By the powers invested in me, I now confer upon you the degree of PhD. Whoa, the wizard said, E equals MC squared. I can think, I have a brain. Now that's fun, that's fantasy. But in the world of music, dominant seventh, I have a brain, I can think, is not fun. It's not correct. It just doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't enable a person to understand the language of music in any sense. All right, let's find out what's wrong with this term, the dominant seventh. First of all, it's composed of two different elements. The Roman numeral 5, which is simply the fifth note of any scale. All right, you've got a note on the fifth note of the scale. It's the dominant. A chord, an interval, it's the fifth note of the scale. The second element is 7. What does that 7 indicate? Well, it's a figured bass, which simply indicates that you have an interval from the root to the seventh of the chord. All right, fine, it's in root structure, fine. So dominant seventh is what it is. But if you have an inversion, like I've seen it in a beginning book where you have the chord BFG described as a 5-7 chord. It isn't. It's a 5-6-5 chord. But what on earth is this term doing in a beginning book, which is such, I mean, it's such a difficult term to understand for anybody, let alone a little 5 or 6-year-old. It should not be in the book. And this BFG is not a 5-7 chord, it's a 5-6-5 chord. All right, fine. But what is the definition of dominant or dominant 7? Let's leave off the 7 there. Let's talk about the word dominant. All right, what does dominant mean? Well, to most theorists, most theory texts, universities, piano students, and so on, it means one thing and one thing only, and that is the fifth note of the scale. But then we start talking about a dominant seventh quality. Oh, well, if this chord isn't found on the fifth note of the scale, let's say it's found on the second note of the scale, then it has to be a secondary dominant. On and on and on. And I call these kinds of theories deus ex machina. Now that's a term which basically means a theory or an idea or concept that's just taken out of the air, so to speak. It doesn't have any background in musical theory or the science of sound at all. It's just taken out of context. So we have one definition of this word dominant, but don't words have several definitions? All right, now we'll get back to this in just a moment, but let's consider a couple other words used in music that have this same problem with definitions. The little small p at the beginning of, let's say, a Chopin nocturne or a Mozart sonata, a little small p there. What does this mean? Well, you go to a music dictionary, and this little small p is the symbol for what they call piano. What does piano mean? Soft. The problem here is, what do you play soft? If there's a melody, you don't play it soft, you sing it. Plus the fact, if you look into an Italian dictionary to find out what this word means as a word, a whole word, not just one definition, you will find that this word soft can mean flat, it can mean quiet, it can mean slower. Now, look it up in a dictionary online if you wish. Don't take my word for it, but look it up and it will give you meanings of the word piano and sentences using that word piano, and one of them is, please speak more slowly. They use the word piano for more slowly. Now, what we're talking about here is the difference between quantitative analysis, or definition, shall I say. In other words, how loud or how soft. Well, piano means soft. Double P's mean very soft, and so on and so forth. All right, let's take a look at the word forte. Forte, you look up in a musical dictionary, and it means loud. Is that it? Is that all? Play loud and you're playing music? I don't know, doesn't make sense. Well, let's take a look at the word forte as a word. If I say cooking is my forte, it certainly has nothing to do with that definition of the word forte as being loud. Cooking is not my loud. First of all, cooking is not my forte in any case, in any way. But anyway, you have forte, which means different things. Any word has many different definitions. And if we don't know these definitions within, especially foreign words, we don't know what's really being talked about. Now, Italian is basically the language of music. You have forte, you have sostenuto, you have allegro, all these different words which come from the Italian. And any musician should have an Italian dictionary to find out what these words really mean. Should have a German dictionary for the works of Robert Schumann. Schumann wrote most of his directions in German. Find out what these words mean. Debussy was a Frenchman. He wrote most of his directions in French. Find out what these words mean in French. Get a French dictionary. Don't go to a music dictionary. I think these music dictionaries are just, well, I'm sorry, useless. Okay, so first of all, I've established that words have different meanings, different definitions, and you should know the word as a word, not just simply one definition. Now let's come back to the word dominant. Dominant is the Roman numeral 5 is a function. You look up in any theory text anywhere, and what is the definition of function? I don't think it's there, because I've looked at most any theory book. I've studied most of them. I own most of them. It just isn't there. Function. All right, we look it up in a dictionary. What does function mean? It means position. Well, okay. My wife is an accountant. She has a position in her company as an accountant. That's her position. What is her function? That it depends upon the what the job requires, its definition, the job itself, its description, in other words, the job description. Okay, the job description in her case, I don't know what it is, to tell you the truth, but it could be accounts payable. Okay, so she has a position as an accountant and a function as account payable. Fine, now we understand what the word function means. Position and use. What does she do? What's her use within that company? Now, let's take a look at that in terms of music. We have a dominant, the Roman numeral 5, which is a position, the 5th note of the scale. Fine, I have no problem with that. But then we have that 7 in there. Now, you must remember that 7 is a figured bass symbol, and that comes from the Baroque, when they did not use Roman numerals. They used just these figured bass symbols, and the organist or the harpsichordist or whatever were expected to create an accompaniment with these figured bass symbols. It indicated the chord makeup and so on. Sharp 5 or 7 or 6/5 and so on. These people back, a couple 300 years ago knew their theory very, very well. They improvised to a great degree. But then we come into the classic period, and then we start combining two functions or two symbols, shall we say, the 5 and the 7. It should not be connected at all because it creates enormous amount of confusion. That word, that term, dominant seventh, should be used with great caution. What on earth are we talking about? Now let's cut out that figured bass symbol 7, and let's talk about dominant itself, the term. All right, it's a function. We've already established that. 5. But isn't there even a possibility that this word dominant could mean something else? Just as piano and forte could mean a quantitative definition of how much, in terms of volume, or its qualitative definition, which is more the soft, slower, gentle, quiet. That's qualitative. That's not quantitative. So let's take a look at the word dominant. Dominant has its own definition, which is accepted by everybody as a function. Its position, 5, the 5th note of the scale. But there's no definition for the dominant as a quality. And there is where everything goes wrong. From that point through, well, history and even our present history, our contemporary works, our contemporary theory manuals, from Ben Ward and Saker on back. And most of these theory books are just simply a rehash of the older works. We have these things that come along. We have terms like dominant seventh or piano and forte. These terms almost become a meme. That's spelled M-E-M-E. A meme can be defined as a unit of thought, shall we say, that's communicated from one person to another without any meaning or anything, sort of like a virus. A meme is a intellectual virus that we don't really look at it. We simply accept it because it's traditional and it's backed up by authority, so to speak. All right, now, if we consider that dominant has that second meaning, a qualitative definition, then we take a look at a chord. Let's say a chord is, I don't know, C, E, G, B flat. That's a dominant, which contains a major triad and a minor seventh. That creates a particular sound which is unmistakable. But to call it 5-7 or dominant seventh is not related to anything. It's just itself. And this is the point. And this is what the ancient Greeks talked about when they talked about logic. Everything has its own identity. But the dominant seventh doesn't seem to have an identity. It only has a position and a function. It doesn't have a quality, an identity. It doesn't even have a symbol as a quality. It has a symbol for its function, which is 5. Forget about the 7. But for a quality in and of itself, C, E, G, B flat, there's no symbol for it. You have symbols for every other quality of chord, both triads, seventh chords, and so on. You have these capital M for majors, lowercase m for minor, the circle for diminished, the circle with a slash through it for half diminished. Nothing for the dominant as a quality. Okay, so what can we do about this? Why don't we give it an identity, a qualitative identity, since no one seems to be, they don't want to, either they don't think about it, I don't know what it is. However, I shouldn't say that. John Mahegan of the Juilliard School used the Greek symbol chi, chi. Maybe it's pronounced chi, I don't know, but it's just simply X. So we use X as the symbol for the quality of a dominant. It has now an identity. It has a symbol. It is an existence in and of itself, just as a major triad has a symbol, or a major seventh, or a diminished seventh, or anything else has its own identity. So with now a symbol and an identity for the dominant, we can do away with so much of the, I don't know, stupidity of some of the theory texts when they go into all these deus ex machina that I described earlier. If you have a dominant on the second degree of the scale, just put your Roman numeral 2 with an X. It's a dominant quality on the supertonic. But no, the theorist has to call it 5 of 5, whereas the dominant is tonicized temporarily and the other dominant is supertonicized temporarily. Now, if that isn't doublethink, I don't know what is. These must be eliminated from all theory texts, and yet they're there from beginning to end. Another thing that I object to is this fad, this thing that so many theorists and everybody seem to use as lowercase Roman numerals for if it's minor. It doesn't work because the lowercase on this leading tone 7 is a half diminished or diminished, but it's not minor, so it doesn't work. These things are just combining, again, function with quality. Combining Roman numeral 5 with the subscript 7. If you combine these things, it just doesn't work. If you're a cook and you want flour, do you want cinnamon in the flour? No, you want flour. You don't combine these elements. And if we don't combine elements, and if we give every element in music theory an identity, now we're talking about what we can use in terms of developing a sane theory, shall we say, of music. And now, one other thing, we talk about theory, but most of what we teach, at least on the lower grade, shall we say, or the young people, is not theory, it's grammar. The grammar of music, of course, is just completely necessary. You've got to know where the keys on the piano are located. That's number one. That's your first lesson on the piano. You've got to know names of notes. You've got to know the staff names. You've got to know the names of the notes on the staff. You've got to know your sharps and your flats and, you know, on and on and on. Now, as far as music as a language is concerned, which I've been talking about all along, I've been talking more about its theory, but let's talk about music as a language. It has what we call syntax. Syntax in the spoken language indicates something that's understandable, that you can say, oh, I see what they're talking about. For instance, we can say, John drove home. Oh, no problem. Did John drive home? Hey, that's interesting. I'm glad he drove home and didn't go to the party, because he didn't look very, you know, you can carry on a conversation after that first sentence, John drove home. What we have here is basically a subject, a verb, and an object. Well, in music, we have very much the same thing. We have a supertonic 2, which is your say your subject. Your dominant is very much your verb. And then your object, of course, is the tonic, which more or less finishes off a phrase or a sentence, you might say. So we have syntax in terms of music, that one chord after another chord in some kind of logical order creates syntax. If we go from a C chord to an F sharp chord to an E flat chord to a there doesn't seem to be any syntax, any logic to that order. If we go from a C chord to a D chord to an E chord, 1, 2, 3, yeah, we can accept that. But one of the basic syntaxes in music is the key circle. The key circle is the basic syntax of what we call Western music, which is based upon the cycle of fifths. But it's not explained. It's not defined in any theory text. They talk about the circle, the key circle, but they don't define it. They don't indicate what it's used for. So we have many of these things that need redoing. In theory classes, you talk about analysis. Well, I'd rather talk about, well, let's use a computer term, parsing. Parsing is simply taking things apart to take a look at it, find out what's there. In music study, and piano study, there should be parsing of what's there, not just the notes. Notes do not make music. And yet, the piano student is encouraged to play the right notes, to study, to practice. And the piano student is always encouraged with the term, practice makes perfect. Now that term is completely true, believe it or not. You take a parrot, and Mary, let's say, has a parrot, and she comes in the room and she says, hello, Mary. And enough times after a while, every time Mary comes in the room, the parrot will say, hello, Mary. Perfect. Practice makes perfect. The piano student is taught to practice the C major scale. Well, after enough times, that piano student will be able to play the C major scale. How wonderful! But it's not music. It's about music, but it's not music. And there's a very important point about theory talking about music, but not music itself. For example, if you're studying a foreign language, you can go to a class or you can buy one of these CDs and the books and so on and teach you the foreign language. But anybody who's bought one of these books and these CDs who studied it, I have never known to be able to speak a foreign language that they have purchased this book for, whether it's French, German, Polish, whatever. But it's interesting that a 3-year-old in Russia speaks Russian very well. Limited vocabulary, of course, but boy, he chatters away in Russian, especially if he's a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, without any knowledge of the language at all. What is a noun, what is a verb, and so on. Music, of course, is not the same way. We've got to study about music so we can play the notes correctly. But we have no idea of how to put this together into actual practice. Music should be an ear affair. It should be a listening. Practicing by ear should be as obvious as driving a car by sight. Yes, you've got to know certain basic elements about driving. You've got to know rules of the road. You've got to know where the clutch, if it has such, or the brake, or the gas pedal. You've got to know a certain thing about these and get used to the car. But you get used to the car not by reading about the car or about the gas pedal or whatever. You learn to drive a car by driving a car. I mean, that's so obvious. But how do you learn music? You learn music about music. You go to a class, a theory class, and learn about music. But how on earth do you use it? At the Chopin Piano Academy, we have developed certain things in piano study that are quite different than the usual method of practicing. I don't believe in practice as such, just going over repetitious, like the example I just gave you on the parrot. That's meaningless. Practice should have some kind of meaning to it, some kind of direction. And I have what I call the modular cyclic system of practicing. I'll explain that, but I can't right now because it wouldn't mean anything, because I don't have a piano right now, but I will. I'll put that on a piano and we'll get some students and show exactly how this is done. And while you're doing this method of practice, modular cyclic practice, what you're practicing should be parsed. Find out what's there. And then music starts to mean something to you. If we have some idea of how a blues song is put together and what the blues notes are, by the way, not the blues scale, but the blues notes, which is basically the minor third, the augmented fourth, diminished fifth, and the minor seventh, then we can start playing. The chromatic scale, part of the blues scale. I can play a chromatic scale and feature some of these blues notes. It's a great blues sound. So in closing here, I'd like to encourage all of you listening to me here to join with me in creating a new theory, shall we say, a new practice method, a new way of approaching music. Memory doesn't do it. Memory is like a glass of water poured on hot pavement. It evaporates. You can memorize something, and most kids do. They memorize something, they perform it in recital, and a week later they've forgotten it. They couldn't play the first note. They've worked hard at those things. They should be able to keep on playing that. Other things that should be taught. Happy birthday, for heaven's sakes. A student's been playing or taking lessons for half a dozen years or more, and attending to a birthday party and says, "Oh, can you play Happy Birthday for us? Johnny's got it's his birthday." "Oh, I don't know it." That's embarrassing. But it should not be memorized. It should be his own way of playing it. And there's so many different ways to play any piece like Happy Birthday. Gospel is a wonderful genre for learning improvisation, harmonic improvisation, melodic improvisation. Ragtime is a marvelous genre, again, for rhythm. It is not improvised. You play the notes as they're there, just as in any classical piece, but they're fun. And there's a great deal of benefit to be gotten from some of these pieces that are not the, I hate to say it, but time-worn pieces of Beethoven and Chopin and Mozart. But please don't get me wrong. That's what I teach. I teach Beethoven, Chopin, and Bach, and so on. But I teach it in relationship to its music. It's not a bunch of theoretical concepts. And it's certainly not notes. Yes, you've got to get the notes right, but you've got to know where the music is going, what it's saying, what its feeling is, what the composer has in mind. So we need to look at these things with a more critical eye and find out exactly what some of these method books are, shall we say, theory books, teaching ways. That goes from all the colleges, whether it's Columbia University or London School of Music, whatever. We need to take a look at what these methods are. Are they taken from something of long ago, or should we bring them up to date and start giving a lot of these concepts some definitions so we can really understand what we're talking about, and when we understand what we're talking about, maybe we can make some music. Thanks for listening.